I see leaders, in inverted commas, or bosses, that who don't necessarily work, they ask others to work. And they take the responsibility for others. Do not send your people where you are not prepared to go. Shareholder value thinking or creation. This talk is rather simple. It's just going to simply remind you of ethics as you execute your duties and the role ethics play in creating value for an institution as a whole. Frequently, you will hear the cliche, you grow a company, you grow your people. And that's in essence what this is all about. I am simply going to remind you of the evils of shareholder value thinking, which has been a rather sexy topic when we come to governance. The average time for holding shares in America, listed companies, 22 seconds. The average time for holding shares in the UK, listed companies, 20 seconds. The average time for holding shares in Australia, listed companies, 22 minutes. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, everyone will conclude that's short term. And think about it. Being a director of a public limited company that's listed, there is an obsession with shareholder value thinking. You ask an economist who owns a company, and he will usually say the shareholders own a company. You ask a lawyer who owns a company, and they tell you the company own themselves, which is more appropriate. I own shares in Orange, or Orange as you would call it. I do not control them. Think about it as far as listed companies are concerned. Companies own themselves. Now the point here with short-term thinking, I beg your pardon, is that financial directors will take decisions that are in essence not beneficial for that company on the medium or long term. We tend to say directors must think long term, and that comes out of the mouth relatively simply. I, like Professor Jowry and many others in here, I'm a lecturer by profession. If you're writing a paper, you tend to say long-term thinking, medium-term thinking. And then some one of the students put up their hand and says, what exactly do you mean by that? How do you get people to think medium or long-term? You ask a finance director, will you take a decision now that will result in your bottom line being affected in the next 3, 6 months, a year? He will probably say no. Do I want to preside over an institution that I'm a director where the share price is going down, down, down? I'm talking about shareholder value thinking. Do I want to preside over that? Very probably no. The lawyers amongst us will say it's harder to hold on to your job as a director than a prime minister holding on to his job. You say you can get rid of directors at any time, even though their service contract has not expired. And what tends to happen is the directors who don't have to be shareholders, remember what I said, shareholders don't own company no more than your father owns you. It's manifest nonsense to suggest. In reality, they own companies when they're liquidated. Who cares when a company is liquidated? As the company is being run, directors control and direct that company. And they may do so for self-gratification. They may do so so that they cling to their jobs. Think about a situation like I put here the ills of shareholder value thinking. The ills of it. BP. $1 million a day they will save by cutting back on health and safety whilst drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, off Clearwater Beach in Florida. $1 million a day, cutting back on health and safety equipment. Now think about it. Per quarter, that's you're saving approximately $100 million. Now that's clearly going to have an effect on your quarterly report. Obviously, it's going to have an effect on it. Your share price is likely to follow. If your quarterly reports and your profits are going up, the share price will go up. Shareholder value thinking. The finance directors are going to like this. I'm presiding over a period of shareholder value increase as such. What happened after? There was an oil spill. That's about 1 million times bigger than Wakashio. BP got fined $4 billion. What happens with the share value at the end? The ills of shareholder value thinking. $4 billion, trying to save $1 million a day. Let's go across to the 737 MAX, as you can possibly see there. I don't know if you know the story behind the 737 MAX. Airbus Industries went to American Air, and they simply said to them, we've looked at your figures, your financial statements. We see that the biggest cost other than lease payments for your aircrafts, fuel, petrol, consumption, paraffin, aviation fuel. We can sell you an aircraft that will cut back on the value, or cut back on consumption by between 12 and 15%. We'll give you some aircrafts where you do not require training or retraining of your pilots. The cockpit or the flight deck is exactly the same. American Air looked at the proposition, the proposal, we'll take 200. We'll take 200 aircrafts. What was Airbus Industries actually doing? They were making the A320 as it was. The same fuselage, they were putting bigger engines on them. Now don't ask me about how it's going to consume less. I'm not an aeronautical engineer. It appears that if you put bigger engines on an aircraft, on the existing fuselage, over the same distance, it'll consume between 12 and 15% less. Now, American Air are probably the biggest airline in the world in terms of aircrafts. They says, okay, we'll take 200. 200 aircrafts. Now, you know the cost of an aircraft. A significant sums of money. We're not talking here about buying a Mercedes or a BMW. Boeing, of course, based in Seattle, an American company, they feel put out by this. An American airline is buying 200 aircrafts from our competitors. So they approached American Air and says, if we promise you the same thing, will you let us have a share of that order? And they said, yes. We'll let you have 100. 100 aircrafts, we'll cut our order from 200 from Airbus to 100, and we'll let you supply 100. And that's where they came up with the 737 MAX. Remember? Like for like. They simply said, they meaning Boeing, you do not have to retrain your pilots, which is exactly what Airbus Industries was saying to American Air. No need to retrain. So they found out that you put bigger engines on the same fuselage. The problem was the 737 MAX wasn't as big as the A320. It wasn't as high as the A320. And it could not take the bigger engines. Short-term thinking. Couldn't take it. You put bigger engines, the thrust from the aircraft goes above the wing and below the wing. And the aircraft starts going like that. It starts going like a rocket. Whereas the Airbus, it's big. The thrust stays under the wing. If you know how an aircraft flies, the thrust is under the wing, the aircraft flies. With regard to the 737 MAX, the engines were too big for the fuselage. A number of whistleblowers simply said to them, the fuselage will not carry these engines. You need to design a new body, the fuselage, a new cockpit. He says, nah, short-term thinking. To design that, redesign this, retrain, will be in breach of contract. Word is going to get out. What's going to happen to our shares? The value of our shares go downwards. They said we'll write a software, the artificial intelligence, that sort of stuff. So when the aircraft starts going like a rocket, it'll override the pilot and start flying this way. Except they put that MCAS, as it was called, as an optional extra on the aircraft on the 737. And they supplied it. It became the bestseller as far as Boeing aircrafts are concerned. You probably know the story by now. Ethiopian Air, and I think it was Lion Air, 346 people are dead as a result of that. Shareholder thinking, the obsession with shareholder value thinking. You don't want to build another fuselage. You're not compromising health and safety. 346 people are dead. As you take off, these are brand new aircrafts. As you take off, the aircraft is going like that. The pilot is trying to do this. He's overridden. It's going like that, like that, like that. Finally, dead. That's it. We haven't worked out what the cost will be to Boeing as yet. 346 people are dead. The 737 MAX doesn't fly anymore. They're grounded. What happened to the share price? Like that anyway. I'm telling you about the evils of shareholder value thinking. You get obsessed with it, short-term thinking. Now think about it. Put yourself in that situation. If I were the finance director of Boeing, would I want to preside over an entire year or 2 or 3 years of share price going like this? I'm not certain. I am not certain. We talk about ethics, moral values in what you're doing. But how do you get people to really think like that? I wonder. To a large extent, I think this comes from the top. Leadership. So from here on now, I'm going to talk about leadership. It's a leadership 4.0. The simple things. Remember your people at the end of the day. Boeing are going to lose billions and billions and billions of dollars. Their aircrafts are not flying, not because of COVID. Because of that thing has got faults and problems with it. That's in essence what we're dealing with here. Just remember that. All right? The evils of shareholder value thinking. Now we're going to talk about ethics here at the end of the day, something which are all close to our hearts. Perhaps it's more appropriate to talk about stakeholder value thinking on creation. Stakeholder value. Richard Branson once says, customers are not king. Employees are king. Treat your employees well, they look after your customers. He says, train them so well, invest in them. And this is a cliche. You want to grow your company, create value, grow your people. You know, we are obsessed with number one. Number one in what? I asked the question. Number one in profits. Number one in employee satisfaction. Number one in customer satisfaction. What exactly are we talking about? What does number one mean? These things roll off our tongue. We're number one. In what? Nokia was number one as well. Where are they now? Kodak was number one as well. Where are they now? We ask the question. Perhaps longevity is about doing business in an ethical way. We want to be at the top all the time, but the top in what? We ask ourselves. And at what cost? This is crucial. Remember ethics. It's easy to say. We talk about AI replacing people. It'll be a sad day if that ever happens. It'll be an extremely sad day if that ever happens. All right? You're not going to find that the world will advance us in a way that we think it will. It will correct itself at some particular point in time. It happens if you believe in God at the end of the day. Stakeholder value creation is about everybody, a holistic approach to the institution. You're looking at your customers, you're looking at your employees. Branson says, train your employees, invest in your employees, train them so well that they can leave, and then do everything to ensure that they do not leave. Now that's very profound. Invest in your employees so that everyone wants them. They can leave. But do everything that you can to ensure that they do not leave. It's a more ethical way. Look after your employees, they look after your customers. It's manifest nonsense, he says, to suggest that the customer is king. Who serves the customers? If your employees are not happy, they're insecure, they're disengaged, they're not empowered, that's not going to be something which your customers will like. They say the best strategy in business is to keep your customers happy, but who keeps them happy? That's the point. It's the employees that keeps them happy, and that will grow the company. It'll build loyalty. It's about brands, if you like. Loyalty, brand equity is keeping a promise. Who keeps the promise? It's the employees that keeps the promise.